Hi, I'm R.L. Parker, epic fantasy and dark fantasy author. I'm here today to talk to you about Dusk. So, before I even get into it, yes, this has this banding on the cover right there that says that it's not for resale. Any author that self-publishes will tell you that this is a product of Amazon. Now, that does not mean that my book is Amazon exclusive. That just happens to be where I ordered this proof from, because I now cross-publish between Ingram Spark and Amazon so that both stores can print their own copies. I did have Ingram Spark copies, but a friend visited from out of state and demanded to buy both of my Ingram Spark copies of Dusk. So I have to reorder my own for my shelf, because I always keep copies of my works. So let's talk for a minute about this novel. This is the third novel that I published. It is part of the same world, Erelon. It has some of the same characters, which I'll get into in a minute, as some of the other stories. But it is its own standalone story. Sequentially, timeline-wise, it does follow Sissy, and there is some overlap in the two stories. You can read Sissy first. I do encourage it. You do not have to. You'll get enough of what's going on by reading Dusk, and sort of hints of what's going on in Sissy if you haven't read it yet, although you will not get spoilers necessarily. Depends on how astute a reader you are. You might be able to glean what's going to happen in Sissy without reading Sissy. That's up to you. That said, again, read them in any order you want. That also does mean that this is set around 700 years before Bathe in the Blood of Ravens takes place. But let's look at this fantastic cover art. This is a charcoal and graphite drawing produced by John Kelly Peevahouse. He also did the cover for Sissy. You heard me talk about him there. Find him at JK Peevahouse, as JK Peevahouse on Instagram. His art is fantastic. I highly recommend, if you like this artwork, you can always go to him and get prints, copies made in almost any size, and he does archival quality prints of all of his work. I highly recommend it. I have a lot of his art hanging in my house by now. But this specifically is a drawing of a lich. And anybody that's played D&D, looking at this guy, will know just how powerful this guy could be. If you were playing Dungeons & Dragons and ran into this, you're about to die. Or you're a super high-level campaign and might have a shot, but somebody's probably going to die. This is Lord Woon. W-H-U-N, Lord Woon. He is an ancient lich who has his own motivations. He's done with his world domination phase by the time this story takes place, and he is in kind of a strange place. I'll let you read what's going on here. He ends up sort of a anti-hero of sorts, if you were to use like a Marvel DC comic term. He's on the side of good-ish, and his current motivations and actions align with the heroes of the novel. So I'll leave his self at that. You'll notice he does not have a lower jaw attached to his head. It is instead attached down here. That is on purpose. One, it fell off because he decayed that much. But two, he could have reattached it. He chose not to for dramatic purposes. That is enchanted, and he thinks through that jaw into people's minds. That's how he speaks. So you'll see some interesting stylistic choices when it comes to him talking in the novel. And then this eye on his crown is functional. He can see a whole lot more using that eye than he could using his normal eyes, which are effectively dead and useless. Now, when John produced this, again, it was charcoal and graphite, and he added the purple coloring digitally. So when he scanned this in, and then he added digital After Effects, and then that became the novel cover. I added the title Dusk and the little blurb up here. It's hard to see on camera. It's a little harder to see in person, to be honest. I probably didn't use the best formatting for this, but if you're holding it in your hand, it's readable. But the Dusk title itself, for some reason, I just could not get it to look right. with color on the lettering. So I chose black lettering and kind of ghosting purple light behind it, which seemed to fit in with what's going on here around his crown. So what's Dusk about? How big is it? How does it relate to the other stories? Let's start with the back cover. The world cannot fear what it does not know, a fact that has allowed the people of Dusk to exist in relative peace for centuries. Hidden behind a shroud of mystery on the distant continent of Zolrathia, the southern kingdom is home to the most devout followers of Erelon's god and goddess of death, who take their church quite literally. Few know the true nature of Dusk's citizens, and fewer know the true nature of Queen Mordessa, the demonic creature who rules them. The only threat the immortal residents of Dusk might fear lies to the north, hiding within a veil of secrecy deep within the Talani Empire. Their ancient war long abandoned for reasons they cannot remember, Dusk's undead and unliving residents live in relative peace, completely unaware of what their queen has done to hold the terrible scaled empire at bay. Fate's memory is less forgiving. And in the byline on the front, relentless be the drive of a kingdom made from bone. Vengeance be their fear, as dragons wake from stone. So, let's talk concept first. Where did this come from? Why did I write this novel as my third novel? Why didn't I just go straight to Enveloped by Dark's Embrace, the sequel to Bathed in the Blood of Ravens? How big is it? How long did it take me to write? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The things I always go over. This is a 137,000 word book. I'll hold it up next to Blood of Ravens so that you can see the difference. They are the same font size. They are the same formatting techniques and approaches. Same page size, same novel size, everything. And you can see the difference. 225,000 words, 137,000 words. I use word count because just changing my font size changes my page count. Page count is a pointless metric. There are a lot of authors out there that will publish their book in 12-pitch font with double-line spacing, looking like it's printed for a manuscript for an editor to use, and it ends up taking a 150-page book and turn it into 310 pages, and they sell it to you, making you think that you're buying a larger novel. I'm not that guy. If people want to do that, more power to them. I'd rather keep my print size as small as readably possible so that I can keep my costs down because I write big books. So then, why this novel third? Well, when I wrote Bathed in the Blood of Ravens, it was an exhaustive process, and I wanted to get more books out quicker for my readers because I wanted to extend my library. All right, I wanted to expand my world in my readers' minds by giving them more to digest as quickly as possible. If I had just written the next book in Bathed in the Blood of Ravens, I'd be sitting here with 2 novels, and yeah, sure, that's great, but that wouldn't show you much outside of the scope of that overall story. Right? There is an overall story for the Destiny of Blood and Magic series that is, into and of itself, and it's all set in the second era of man, and blah, 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 blah. I wanted to show more of what was going on to build up to that. I also wanted to crank out smaller novels that I could produce more quickly, get into readers' hands more quickly, also to be able to flex styles of writing that I don't necessarily get to leverage in the big books. But this turned into a big book. This was supposed to be as big as Sissy. They were supposed to be the same size. My original hope was, hey, I'm going to write another 40 to 50,000 word novel, and I'll have 2 very small novels that are quick reads that'll get people into the world. Yeah, that didn't work out. Like I said when I was talking about Sissy in the last video, I write until the story is done. So if that takes longer, it takes longer. If it's quicker, it becomes a short story, and I put it for free on my website, whatever happens. But I write until the story has reached a conclusion. And this story just ballooned out of nowhere. I had a concept of dragons versus undead, and a couple other concepts. And I put them up on Twitter as a poll, and overwhelming response was dragons versus undead. You've got to write that next. So, okay. Well, that means I'm writing the story, the backstory for 2 specific characters from Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. I knew that going into it, that's what that was going to be if I wrote it. I also knew where it was going to be set. I also knew the time period it was going to be set if I wrote it. that's about where it ended, right? That's where the concept had its conclusion. I didn't necessarily know where the story was going to go. I didn't necessarily know the main cast that was going to be involved. I had the general concept, and that general concept was that continent of Zulrathia. Now, back in my D&D days, that was always a continent that was alluded to or talked about. We made a couple small trips to it as players, but the players didn't really spend a lot of time there. Most of the gaming content, most of my story content happens on the much, much larger continent named Gargoa, usually centered around what would become or is or used to be the Kingdom of Arcania. That's why that's the centerpiece for the terrain in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens. That's where almost all the action happens there, or the much smaller island continent of Pelragos off to the east coast. So that's where most stories take place back in my 90s gaming days, or in most of the stories I'm going to write is that. Which meant that I was writing in a continent that I hadn't done much world building on. I was writing in a continent I hadn't explored much. I knew a couple simple facts about it. The north was a giant ancient caldera, and caldera is basically a massive crater created by a long gone volcano. Like Yellowstone National Park in America is effectively a caldera. So in this case, I knew that the northern half of Zulrathia was a massive caldera that was all stony and rocky, some vegetation here and there, small forests here and there, but mostly it was just ringed with this massive mountain chain and basically a gigantic, several 1,000-mile in circumference bowl, if you will. And inside that caldera, there used to live a draconic empire, just peopled by dragons and only dragons and dragon-ken, ground-based dragon-like things. And now, at the time that this is set, all the dragons are gone for an unknown reason. There's hints that a war took them out or petrified them, they're not sure. But there are indeed massive, giant dragon statues in certain cities. And the people are broken up that's the Talani Empire, and the people are broken down into 5 dominions, one for each element. So you got earth, fire, air, water, and magic are the 5 dominions. And each one serves a dragon that had that as their kind of vibe. You've got a fire dragon, a water dragon, etc. It's mostly magic. It's not different breath weapons. They all breathe fire. So you've got the 5 dominions serving what are now petrified dragons that they consider gods, and that's that empire. And I knew to the south was a more normal terrain, so it's plateaus, valleys, hills, mountains along the edges, rivers, whole 9 yards. But all of that, at one point, it was a whole bunch of cities that grew into one massive city that covered the entire terrain. It's the Kingdom of Banchalaria. And the Kingdom of Banchalaria, if you were to look at Banchalaria as a whole, it's not a perfect circle, nowhere close, but in the center is a chunk of land that seems to be chained to the ground so that it's flush with the rest of the terrain around it. In ancient times, that chunk of terrain is believed to have been floating in the sky, anchored to the ground so that it wouldn't float off into, out of the atmosphere, and that is where one of the gods of death lived. Eventually, mortals pulled it to the ground and locked it to the ground, and that became the center of the city of Dusk, or Banchalaria, the Kingdom of Banchalaria. The citizens, hundreds of years ago, nicknamed it Dusk, because it always seems to be just about night. And if you think of night as, night and day as life and death, or death and life, night being death, day being life, then it kind of also is a play on words. Because there are 2 major religions in Banchalaria, the worship of Zrandis and the worship of Ishnu. Now, Zrandis is, the physical embodiment would be an Agthari Titan. Agthari is the name of a race of Titans on Erelon. They're no longer around, but they were, between 25 and 50 feet tall, massive humanoid things. Not all looked human, but they were humanoid. Now, Zrandis was one of them, and he was the god of death. And he reveled in the act of dying and how violent it could be and what came after and the power you could gain by overcoming that death and blah, 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 blah. So when you talk about characters like, Lord Woon and liches in the world and violent undead, you would think correctly so that most of them would be servants of Zerandis. And then you get to Ishnu, who is, again, her physical embodiment, to use the same terminology, is a Silvani elf, referred to as a kind of an elf by the people that have seen them or seen drawings or paintings of them, because of the pointed ears and their elegant, sleek figure and all of that. But she's basically an 18-foot tall winged elf from another reality who has found her way onto Erelon in the ancient past and is the goddess of death. Now, in her case, her perspective on death is completely different. It's the complete polar opposite. To her and her followers, death is part of the cycle of life. And dying shouldn't be sought after, but should be celebrated, because it means that your death is contributing to something that comes after, right? Something dies in a forest and it becomes fertilizer for plants to grow, et cetera, et cetera. So they celebrate death in a different way, whereas the Zerandites, so you've got Ishnites that serve Ishnu and Zerandites that serve Zerandis. One seeks death and seeks the power they can gain from it, and the other, doesn't seek death but celebrates that it's part of the cycle of life and more of a, hey, this is let's turn it into more of a lovey thing. So two polar opposites in religion, but those are the two religions. I keep hitting my mic, I don't know why, but those are the two religions in Dusk. So how do you keep the peace? Well, you inject a freaking demonic queen that takes over and mandates that they will get along, and then uses this magical device and artifact to help the Ishnites attain a form of immortality that makes their lifespans competitive with the undead that are the Zerandites, right? So Lord Woon came about before all that, and he just grew so powerful he was able to perpetuate his own existence by trapping his soul somewhere and protecting it and perpetuating himself through magic, and just how powerful he is. That's a lich, right? But the rest of the Zerandites could go and pray at the temple, onto Zerandis' throne, and, if they were, worthy or powerful enough, then they too, like a lich, could gain a form of immortality. Well, in order for the Ishnites to accomplish that, they didn't want to become undead, right? They abhor that. They accept it because they are forced to by their living circumstances, but it's not what they would choose to become. So instead, the Queen Mordessa brought about this artifact called the Agripha, that the Ishnites could go and follow a ceremony, and what the Agripha allowed them to do in accompaniment by powering this ritual was it would strip their soul off away from their body and then reattach it back to themselves through a form of magic that would let their body effectively consume portions of their soul slowly over time to rejuvenate and regenerate their body and keep it alive for far longer than it normally would have. Right, so the human body, elven bodies, whatever, they decay over time because we lose the ability to heal ourselves through certain wounds, or we lose the ability to produce stem cells. We know that now from science and things like that. Well, to circumvent that, they basically are using magic and turning their souls into sort of rejuvenative batteries, for lack of a better term. They become what I call unliving. So you get this massive city, which, due to nobody really dies anymore, has, over a couple thousand years, grown to the size of about 10 million people. And yes, I did check the math on population density and escalation compared to real world. It is totally possible over the timeline they've existed for them to hit that, or even way beyond. But I limited their reproductive cycles because it made sense. So, millions of people living in Dusk on lifespans that are way too far extended, to the point where they just kind of live in complacency. They just subsist. They keep going and doing the things they've always done because it's what they do, right? They don't have any aspirations for something higher. Most of the people don't, because there's no point in it. They just are. So you get unliving that are living that way, and you get undead that are living that way. But they know that the rest of the world would fear them. So they isolate their country from the rest of the world, right? The outer edges of their landmass on the southern coast, eastern, whatever, but in the southern part of Zolrathia, it has little fishing villages that are living people live in, because people are still born. They still have to grow to mature ages, and they are either selected to stay in those fishing villages to keep up the front and make it look like they're just a basic run-of-the-mill podunk little country, or they are taken back into the core of the Kingdom of Banchalaria and ascended to one of the two religions. Either they become undead or they become unliving. And if they decline that once they are told that they must do it, then they are exiled. That's where I'll leave that. So after hundreds upon hundreds of years of living that way, what the queen did to stop the dragons and what the queen did to end the war is about to break down. It's about to come apart at its seams, and it's all about to crash back into Banchalaria and into the Talani Empire in a very horrid way, potentially horrid way. Lord Wound starts discovering what's going on, and he starts taking action. And then meanwhile, we get the other cast that starts appearing around the rest of the world that will be pulled into this plot and then help it unfold. The other cast, I mentioned that there was another character or two characters that were this was their backstory. One of them is Lord Wound. He's mentioned in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens, even though he does not make an actual direct appearance. If you pay attention when it gets to the part where some of the cast is sitting around campfires talking in Pelragos to some of the locals that they've just met, they will talk about an event that happened in old times where a Lord Wound came and was stealing souls of people and blah, 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 blah. So this is part of Lord Wound's backstory, hundreds of years before Bathe in the Blood of Ravens. And the other main character that is also in Blood of Ravens, and it plays a prominent role in this, is Stonehawk, A-H-M, as his first name, Stonehawk. He is a unliving priest of Ishnu. And I think it becomes obvious as soon as I say that why he would be in the novel. He is the head of the Ministry of Defense of the Kingdom of Banchalaria when the novel starts. And he ends up at some point getting tasked to go and find Lord Wound by the Queen, and events unfold. In the meantime, there are also a couple, younger heroes that get sucked into this, because when we're talking about Stonehawk and Lord Wound, you're talking really about hundreds of years old ancient powers, so to speak. So they're in there. They are a large part of the cast and what's going on, but they're not what I would consider main characters. As far as main characters go that are unique to this novel, that starts off first with a young dark elf man named Tavin, who has been trained his whole life to hunt what his religious sect over in Gargoa believes to be abominations in the eyes of Ishnu. Remember that Ishnu sees death as more of an expression of new life. To that end, his religious sect, the Daxian Order, sees anything that falsely perpetuates life as an abomination. And that would mean necromancy in almost any form, any kind of undead, any kind of unliving, any of that would be just abhorrently wrong in their eyesight. And he was trained to be a purifier, or effectively an assassin of undead, unliving, and necromantic people. So we start off with him going off on his first mission, and it not necessarily going well. Sorry, I hope this is going again. Where was I? He's going to go through his first real mission, and it's not necessarily going to go the way that he would have wanted. He succeeds, but also not at the same time. I'll let you read about that. He eventually, through his travels due to that situation, heads north and runs into another kind of outcast from society, which is a young gnome thief named Gnadly. And yes, that's a hard G, Gnadly, even though it's Gnately. She is kind of halfway based on a character my wife played back in the 90s named Gnadly the Gnome, and she'll enjoy that I brought that up. Gnadly rarely took anything seriously. That's in the novel. She had a very fun sense of humor and kind of poked fun at creatures that she shouldn't along the way. Her mouth always got her into a little bit of trouble, but she also had the skill to get out of those situations most of the time. When we meet her, she's going through kind of a who am I kind of phase where, she was raised by her family, her mother specifically, to be like the rest of the family. And they were all kind of, vagabonds and thieves and stole to make their money and put food on their table. And they weren't really honest members of society, let's be honest. So they've all decided that, the law is coming down too hard in this area. We're going to move, and we don't like it here in the fiefdoms anymore, so we're gone. And she's like, I don't want to go. So she ends up staying, and now she's kind of lost, and she doesn't know what she's going to do with her future. Right now, she's just kind of, ticking along as she always was with her family, but unsure where she's going from there. Things unfold, and she ends up getting roped up into Tavin and what he's, traveling away from or towards. And they end up, through their journeys, they do meet a young man named Anan, who they help free from his situation. And he joins them as a way to say thanks. He's a little bit of the quiet type guy, the guy that grew up a little too big and muscular for his own good, and didn't really understand his impact on the world around him, or couldn't control himself very well. So he's self-isolated with his parents at the time. His parents die. He ends up trapped in this situation. Tavin and Gnadly happen upon him and help him out. So he sucks over to him. He's like, "Yeah, you're my buddies. You're my pals. You helped me." So he ends up going with him. That's not how his voice sounds. I do that sometimes. I don't know why. He ends up traveling with them. They end up in a small port town where a fishing town really, where they meet a young girl named Pia, and due to her circumstances, she ends up joining in too, and the four of them kind of get forcefully whisked away and end up on Zorathia, where they meet the other half of the cast that has been building to that point in the novel. So you get a split point of view where sometimes you're on Gargoa, dealing with Tavin, Gnadly, and their group, and other times you're back over on Zorathia, dealing with reading about either Lord Woon or Am Stonehawk, or Am's secret daughter, Mina, and her lover, Eros. Mina and Eros are actually the first characters other than Lord Woon that pop up as main cast over on Zorathia when we see those points of view. Mina is a young girl that was born under very mysterious circumstances, has a lot of mysterious potential power things that might be coming into play with her that they're discovering over time. But fears that Queen Mordessa and her agents might find out that Mina exists and what she is. So he has hidden her away her whole life down in an underground catacombs complex called the Cryx. Mina starts sneaking out before the novel starts, and we first see her on an overlooking a port town at the edge of the major city of Dusk, with her lover laying under the stars and looking up at the stars and just talking to each other. Now I say lover loosely because this is all new to her and it's new to him. He grew up in a church atmosphere, being tuteled in his ways as an apprentice priest. And he started sneaking out to try and see more of the world before he agreed to ascend and become an unliving priest. She was sneaking out because she had never seen the world. They end up meeting each other before the novel starts, and we first see them on a hill together looking up at the stars, experiencing new love. So you see a little bit of the more playful side of that at first, and it makes her seem a little more quirky and like I don't know, maybe not as strong of a woman, maybe more flimsy or thinly veiled. I can't think of the right terms right now. But as we see her story progress, you start to realize this deeper undertone of resentment and just curiosity and this very stoic approach to things, even though she's got this very curious, whimsical side, and she has these things that are happening to her and within her that she doesn't necessarily understand. And then you see her go so she's got PTSD from the entrapment that she went through, and she's got a lot of resentment for but she also loves him and appreciates him as a father figure, because she does consciously realize that he was doing it for her benefit and not his, and that becomes more and more obvious as the story goes along, that he may have been actually very correct in keeping her hidden. It was an interesting experience writing from her perspective because of those little nuances in her. It was fun to explore. But similar to, Silkara having a very tragic life in Sissy, Mina has sort of some tragic stuff in her life that's somewhat similar, but it's not similar in story or context. It's similar in emotional impact. So it's a good way to see how that you can kind of come to the same mental place even through different traumas, and that people can relate to each other even though they didn't have the exact same past, right? But at a certain point in the novel, we end up with Tavin and Ganadli and Anan and Pia, Mina and Eros all together finally, and it's sort of a coming together kind of scene with some pretty harsh, things happening around it, and some pretty dark circumstances as you get these people that never grew up around there on Zolrathia experiencing the dark side of what Dusk really is under the hood, and people like Mina and Eros able to finally see what it looks like to an outsider to see into their world. And then they get sucked into what Lord Woon and Stonehawk are dealing with, and plans that may be evolving around that, and that does lead to the climax novel, or the climax of the novel, which is a chapter named War, and that does mean that there will be a war in this novel. It's not a combat-heavy novel, not like Blade and the Blood of Ravens, where it seems like every other scene you've got somebody fighting. It's not like Sissy, where it's pretty much after the first couple chapters, she's either running in fear, hiding in fear, trying not to die, or trying to survive, or fighting something. This definitely has a different tone. And from a writer perspective, I needed to explore that more. Because Enveloped by Dark's Embrace is going to go to some pretty dark places for Lawrence. And I needed him I needed to be able to express what he's going to go through in a more accurate way. So some of the traumas that he's going to experience, or the other cast are going to experience or go through, I got a chance to flex between Sissy, and Dusk. So it was a good thing for that reason. What upset me about Dusk was that I wasn't able to achieve my under 50,000 words goal. If I tried to make this novel 50,000 words, it would suck bad. In its original first draft, which to me a first draft means I've done a quick editing pass, at least in Pro Writing Aid, and I've handed it to my wife, and she's done at least line level edits. Right? That's what I consider a first draft, or what I consider capable of being or acceptable to hand to a beta reader. So I handed it to beta readers. It was only about 110,000 words, maybe 114, maybe. Due to beta reader feedback, I actually had to expand this novel. So I was already twice as long as I wanted to be originally, but the story was solid. What I was missing was some extra details about the world itself for people that hadn't read my other novels. And that was a key point of beta reader feedback that I got was, hey, we don't know enough about this, we don't know enough about that. And I had those aha moments reading their feedback going, oh, crap, these people haven't read Blood of Ravens and Sissy. That's right, I want this to be a standalone novel. I need to expand that. So I did. I wrote a brand new chapter 1. The original chapter 1 became chapter 2. I did some pretty heavy edits on chapters 2, 3, 4. to add some details at the start of the story while it was already a little bit slower than I wanted. But I was also able to add some more flavor in, a little bit more spice here and there. And I took the original final chapter was about 3 pages, and I expanded that quite a bit. So all that to say, if you like gothic horror kind of things, it's not really horror, but it uses some of the characters and creatures you might see in gothic horror. There are dragons, there are undead, there's liches, there's magic, there's priestly magic, and just pure raw power kind of magic. There's swordplay, dagger fights, thievery. There's orcs, goblins, and then all the dragon kin that you might expect or not even expect because they're new for this. So there's a lot going on. There are 2 zombies, but they're tied to a wall. They're not the main cast of the book. Some pretty interesting mass transit system in the city of Dusk that I hope you enjoy reading about. And I do even cover how some of the economy of a city that large, that ancient, actually does work. It was all very fun to write, but also very challenging because it was a lot of new territory to cover. So, timeline, where does it fit? The beginning of this story overlaps with the entirety of Sissy. So they are set at basically the same day and time-ish. This one's a much longer story. It's several months long, whereas Sissy is only a couple days. Some of the cast from Sissy does make an appearance in here. You will hear mention of Nightweaver. You will see Nightweaver in a couple chapters. Whereas you saw her in a couple chapters in Sissy. She was the prologue to Sissy. There's no prologue in this novel because I didn't feel it needed it. There's no bonus short story because I haven't written one that I feel applies. But back to the characters. Nightweaver is in it, or Sorsha, however you want to call her. She goes by both. Silkara makes an appearance in this. The young girl she meets along the way in Sissy, Nadira, makes an appearance in this. Stonehawk is in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens and in Dusk. Lord Woon is mentioned in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens, and he's very present in Dusk. Tavin, Gnadly, Anan, Pia, Mina, and Eros are all brand new for Dusk, but some of them will be making an appearance in Enveloped by Dark's Embrace and either being mentioned or their characters will be there. So there will be overlap, or at least cross-references. There's a very critical sword that appears in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens in the hands of Drakal. That is actually, its creation is mentioned in Dusk, and it is used by a different character in Dusk. It's Strumbranor. That's the name of the sword. So that will be here too. There's also a character that is mentioned in the prologue to Sissy and vaguely in conversations with 2 of the characters near the end of the book, named Mordecai, who is also heavily prevalent in Bathe in the Blood of Ravens, and also a version of him makes an appearance in Dusk. So, character overlaps, yes. Check all those boxes. Subplot of the whole overarching story of the world references, yes, present in all 3. Can this be read without the other 2? Yes. Can it be read before the other 2? Yes. You could read this even before Sissy and go back and read Sissy, and that'll fill in gaps that you'll see in the scenes in here. You can read it last, you can read it first, you can read it in the middle, read it in chronological order, or reverse chronological order, whatever you wish. They're designed to be treated that way. The only books of mine that you won't be able to necessarily read out of order are the series novels for things like A Destiny in Blood and Magic, which is the series that Bathe in the Blood of Ravens is the first book of. But even that, I'm planning currently on putting the synopsis of, a spoiler-riddled synopsis of Bathe in the Blood of Ravens as the prologue to Enveloped by Dark's Embrace. So you could, theoretically, if I carry through with that plan, even pick up Enveloped by Dark's Embrace when that comes out, hopefully next year, and read that first, and then go back and read Bathe in the Blood of Ravens. So, I hope you like what you've heard. Hopefully I've inspired some people to pick up copies of my novels, or even maybe drop tidbits that could help other authors with the way that they approach novels. If you like what you've heard, subscribe. If you've read my novels, please post reviews Goodreads, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, any other bookstore. I'm available worldwide through almost any book distributor you could want to order from. Anybody you want to support, Scribd, Kindle, Nook, any of them. You can probably find my novels there. Pick them up, share them around with your friends and family, post reviews, whether you like them or love them, be honest, and hope to see you all again soon.